Hi there, Titans, and welcome back to another Titan Academy video. Today we'll be talking about optimization and validation when working with Salesforce data. First, we'll show you how to combine Salesforce actions into a single node in order to improve optimization. We'll also touch upon parallel load function so that you can make sure that your Salesforce actions are running more quickly as well. Then we'll show you how to validate your data before pushing it to Salesforce. We'll also show you how you can validate fields that are not included in your push. And finally, we'll show you how you can ignore validations on your project so that you can make sure that you're only validating data when you actually want to be validating it. Let's get started. I've got a simple form here where my end user enters company info, a primary contact, and uploads a form. Now at the end of this, I'd like for my user to push all that data to Salesforce, and I've already set up these pushes, an account update, a contact create, and a file push. In a previous video, we discussed how to nest these pushes in order to create a relationship between your different records, but we'll show you a different way of doing it today, and it will be helpful for you. So the first thing I want to take a look at here is I'm going to show you how to do this in the improper way, but what we see with a lot of our end users. So a lot of our end users will do the following. They're going to break up their integrations into several different nodes. So for example, here they might create their account. Then they'll say, once the account is finished, I want to create another integration. I want to create a contact. And after I'm done creating my contact, finally, after finish, I'll create my file. Now, this will work, and I'll demonstrate that this works. So let's go ahead and apply it. Let's look at a company. We'll say, let's find our Titan company, and let's go ahead and do Billy Strong's, and we'll give it an email, and we'll finally choose a file here. And as you can see, I don't know if you noticed the flickering, but 3 separate integrations ran, took a bit of time, and as you can see, it actually did create the account, contact, and files. Now, this is fine and it works, as you can see, but it is a much slower process, and that's because we are accessing the server 3 separate times for each node. So what we want to actually do is combine these into a single node so that we only have to access the server a single time. So I'm going to stack my integrations like so, and it's important in my case that I use an order because my contact is dependent on my account and my files are dependent on my contacts. So I need to actually put a custom order of execution and make sure that the records are being created in the correct order in Salesforce. And so all I need to do is do this custom order of execution, and this will actually make my push run a lot faster. So highly recommend doing this. Let's just take a quick look. All right, let's try this again. We'll do a contact, and we'll add a file here, and we'll finish. And theoretically, this integration should be working a lot faster. Now, on a small project like this with a very little amount of data, it's hard to see the difference in the speed, but trust me, it's much better to keep this in a single node. One more thing to note here is we had to do custom order execution in our case, but if there is no dependency between your integrations, it's best to do parallel load because that will allow all the integrations to run alongside one another, and that will also save you some optimization time on your project as well. All right, having done that, let's move over to the validation portion of our video where we're going to learn a little bit more about validation. Now, some of these things we've covered in the past, but we'll review. In general, whenever we have a Salesforce integration like this, where we're first pushing an account and then contact and then files or any multiple objects that we're trying to push, it's best to make sure that everything is validated before we try to push. For example, if I fail validation on my contact and my account is created first, I don't necessarily want to create an account in Salesforce unless I have a contact to go along with it. And in that case, it would be best to put here a validation node before, and we can do this on the current strip on our page, a specific field or a group of fields. I'm going to do it on my entire page. But this will help to make sure that nothing gets created unless I am completely done and all of my data is filled in. So I highly recommend adding a validation node like so, making sure that you're on the on valid, okay, that you're not coming from here, but that you're coming from the on valid, and only once everything is valid, then I'll push it all to Salesforce. So that's one thing to note. We also can use this for another purpose. So in order to do this, I'm actually going to disconnect my nodes, and I'm going to connect this, and I'll go ahead and apply. Now let's put here at the bottom a checkbox that says, I agree to these terms. Now this checkbox is not going to Salesforce, but I still want to make it mandatory and make sure that my end user does this. So let's see if that will actually work for me if I try to run this. So I'm going to do again, we'll use the same account and we'll say Vlad. Again, just put in an email here. All right, now notice I have a mandatory field here, but I'm going to click finish and it will still allow me to run my integration. And that's because this mandatory field is not in my push and it will only fail, for example, if I try to erase this, well, it'll already not let me go to the next field, but in general, this wouldn't let me push the contact without filling in my mandatory fields because I have this field mapped. But because my checkbox is not mapped in any push, it will not be validated unless I add this validation node like so. So let's add that and we'll demonstrate the same thing. All right, we'll choose some options here. Okay, add our email. And now this time we'll try again to push without ticking our box. And notice that it did not allow me and it validated this field. So that's another important thing to note. The final thing we'll take a look at today is the ignore validation option. And what this will help do is make sure that the fields are only being validated when I want them to be validated. So in order to do this, we're going to set up a push here that will run based on the condition that I'm about to write, which is that if this is not empty, then I want to run a get from Salesforce, and I'm going to get a contact, and we'll just get a single contact whose account ID matches that lookup field. And I'm going to go ahead and map the first name to the first name, my last name to my last name, and my email to my email. All right, so let's switch this to user action, and we'll go ahead and apply that over here. Excellent. All right, so now let's take a look what will happen. Now, if I choose a company here that does not have an account, a contact, and I'm going to assume that this account doesn't have a contact, and let's just see if I'm right. Now my get will run, and notice that this triggered my mandatory fields over here, and that's because a get ran and it didn't fill it up. Now this could be confusing to the end user because they haven't gotten to this point, they haven't filled out these fields, and it might be confusing for them, and truthfully, we don't want to run this validation, meaning if we find an account that doesn't have a contact, we just want our user to be able to fill this in and not actually trigger any validations here. So how can we prevent the validation from being triggered for a particular get? Now, in order to do this, we can head over to the get in question, the get action, and it can be for get or push, it doesn't really matter, but we can go ahead and click the ignore validation. And now we'll do the same exercise, and we should see that that validation should not be triggered. So let's put in here that same company, and notice that even though the get did run, it did not trigger any of the validations that we see here. And so that can be a much nicer experience for your end user to only validate when you really want to be validating fields. And that's how it's done.